So questions can be entered into the chat box in Zoom today, and we'll do our best to field these as time permits. The chat function can be located on the bottom navigation bar in Zoom. So we really value your input and your comment. We actively use this information to better shape administrative rules to meet your needs. So please be engaged throughout this process. Comments can be submitted to Commerce using the form we've posted on our webpage, and Annalyn will review that process here before the end of the presentation today. Next slide. It looks like Judy put that link in the chat box as well to the comment form. Thank you, Judy. So Commerce's mission is to strengthen communities, and we do this through a broad range of policy and programs, including housing and homelessness, business assistance, community services, and energy work. Next slide, please. This is the agenda for this morning's workshop. We're going to be providing a brief overview of the rulemaking process. We'll do a review of the elements of House Bill 1390. We'll talk through a Commerce data request that we have for you all, and then we'll provide instructions on how to submit comments. We're going to try to wrap this workshop up by 12 noon, so it'll be a hour-long workshop. Future workshops may be a bit longer. Next slide, please. So I wanted to provide real brief introductions to our team. Our entire team is dedicated to providing timely, actionable, and clear information about the state's clean buildings law, in addition to all of our other programs. So most of the folks that are going to be presenting today are in the buildings unit, and we oversee a very broad range of codes, standards, and programs focused on decarbonization of the built environment here in Washington State. My name is Emily Salzberg, and I'm the manager and director for the buildings unit. Your presenters today are going to be Liz Reichart, Annalyn Bergen, Sonny Westfall, and Luke Howard. And then we work with a talented team of staff focused on database development, policy development, program implementation, communications and outreach, and all kinds of work. Next slide, please. So before we jump in, I wanted to take a quick step back and briefly talk about the role of buildings here in the state of Washington relative to our greenhouse gas emissions limits. So buildings have a profound impact on the environment and carbon emissions. The building sector is the state's second largest carbon polluter, behind only transportation. As Washington's population has grown, greenhouse gas emissions from the building sector has jumped significantly. Existing buildings, especially those buildings connected to district energy systems, create unique challenges and opportunities as the state works to meet our greenhouse gas emissions limits in statute. Investment in building energy efficiency is the most cost-effective way to significantly reduce these emissions from the building sector. Now I'm going to hand it over to Liz from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. So for those of you who may be joining a state rulemaking process for the first time, this is a look forward as to what's in store. So the CR 101 is when we filed paperwork to indicate that we'd like to get the process of amending our rules started. And so we have already filed that. We will host 3 to 4 workshops to get everyone familiar with the contents of the bill, House Bill 1390, and have an opportunity to discuss important questions that need to be settled in rule with the public input. We will then file our proposed rules as the CR 102, and then the public has a little bit over a month to digest those rules and submit more public comment to let us know what they would like changed or altered in rule text. And then finally, we will adopt final rules for the implementation of House Bill 1390. This is a look at our rulemaking schedule, which encompasses all of the steps that I just described. So today we'll tackle, so throughout the next few months, we'll tackle different technical topics at each of the 3 workshops. Today marks our kickoff, which is just an introduction to the legislation and a little bit of what we're setting out to do. Workshop 2 will focus on developing out the rules to implement 1390. And finally, we'll have a workshop in March focused on administrative requirements before developing those draft rules in April and final rules in May and June. This slide depicts the cycle of public comments during the workshop phase. And so this is really where you, the public, come in. After every workshop, Draft rules will be emailed to registrants and later posted on the Commerce Clean Buildings website as soon as possible. We will give 2 weeks to comment on draft rule text, and then we will summarize the feedback that we received at the subsequent workshop, which is where this process repeats itself. We'll release more draft rule text, we'll want your feedback, your input, and then we will summarize it at the next workshop. So because there are so many of us here, we ask that participants in our workshops be respectful and use the chats or comment forms to provide feedback. Those links are or will be shortly in the chat. Our goal is for these rules to really be a reflection of our work here together, and our rules will only benefit from these workshops being inclusive and participatory. So we just ask that everyone be respectful and show good manners.
Okay, thank you, Liz, and Emily for the introductions. The next 10 slides or so, Donnie and I will be kind of providing an overview of the 1390 legislation. So our intent here is to discuss what's in the legislation. We're not going to jump into the actual proposed rules for these legislative requirements today. That will be in our next workshop. So if you have clarifying questions, please enter them in the chat. James is going to review the chat, and we'll provide some time for relevant questions to be discussed and answered during this portion of the presentation today. Again, any comments in general regarding specific rule questions when it comes to these legislative requirements, feel free to send those in through our comment form that Judy has posted the link in the chat here. So for those more in-depth questions regarding proposed rules, that would be the appropriate place to put those questions. But we will be discussing the legislation now. For clarifying questions, please submit those in the chat. Okay, well, let's start with decarbonization. What is decarbonization? ASHRAE defines decarbonization as the process of removing or reducing human-made greenhouse gas emissions. House Bill 1390 is focused on decarbonization of the district energy systems heating plants. So specific to the legislation is decarbonization of the heating plants. Just a little note, ASHRAE just published their new version of Standard 100. So standard is the base standard we use for the Clean Building Performance Standard. We use the 2018 version. We don't plan to update that until at least the next cycle. So that would be 2031. So we might start reviewing and considering upgrading the standard to 2024 at that point. Won't happen before then. I do want to note that the new standard does have additions to it that covers decarbonization in buildings. So that might be of interest to you folks here that are industry professionals working in this field. Next slide. Okay, so intent. The legislature recognizes that building decarbonization is necessary to achieve the state's climate goals. So this means big investments, big savings. And when we talk about decarbonizing the district energy system in relation to 1390, it allows for more time to obtain funding and comply with the state's Clean Building Performance Standard in general. So House Bill 1390 authorizes an extended period of up to 15 years plus to implement the decarb plan and comply with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. So this legislation is also an important part of a just transition to a clean energy economy. So decarbonization plan requirements. These workshops will be the mechanism in which we spend the next few months developing the specific requirements of these district heating system decarbonization plans within the parameters of the given legislation. So this legislation requires the inclusion of the following in these rules. So mechanisms to replace fossil fuels in the heating plants, evaluation of options to partner with nearby sources and uses of waste heat and cooling, examination of opportunities to expand the footprint served by the decarbonized district system, and a plan that includes meeting the energy use intensity target of the campus served by the district system. So there are also recommendations in the legislation for these decarbonization plans. Again, these are not requirements, they are recommendations. They include the following. You can see it on the list here. This will be good. You'll get a copy of this slideshow after the presentation, so you can keep these for your future reference. But those recommended considerations are distribution network upgrades, on-site storage facilities, space cooling for residential facilities, labor and workforce development considerations, considerations of public and private partnerships, and considerations of hooking up to a waste heat recovery from domestic sewage. So approved decarb plans shall include a pathway for reaching the energy use intensity target for the campus, in addition to implementation of the energy management plan and operations and maintenance program in accordance with the standard in all the campus buildings connected to the district system, regardless of building size. So decarb plan is a pathway to clean building performance standard compliance. The primary performance metric for compliance is still the EUI, meeting the energy use intensity target. But instead of creating an energy use intensity target or complying at the building level, you're allowed to comply at the campus level. So decarb plan should include a pathway for meeting the energy use intensity target upon full implementation of the decarb plan. So again, you've got 15 plus years to implement the decarb plan. At that time of implementation, you shall meet the energy use intensity target, as well as have implemented the energy management plan, operations and maintenance program in all connected buildings. There is an alternative pathway. If you can't meet the energy use intensity target, you need to show that an energy audit documents that the improvements listed in the plan, which include the decarb of the district energy system, the heating system, saves as much energy as the energy efficiency measures identified at the campus level. So in addition to that allowance, phased implementation may also be included in the decarb plan. Next slide, please. Donnie, you want to take over from here?
Yeah, thanks, Luke. So over
Actually,
that-
you know, before we go to Donnie, James, were there any questions in the chat that we can handle now?
Yep. So actually we had two of them. The first one coming in is, will Commerce try to mesh with Seattle's BEPS, especially as BEPS is allowing for portfolio-wide carbon emission metrics?
Yeah, we are not going to allow for portfolio level compliance with the Clean Building Performance Standard, but we are going to follow the rule development for Seattle's BEPS and try to find as many areas where we can coordinate efforts and reduce, increase the symmetry between the two standards. But we do allow for campus level compliance, which is similar to the BEPS, as well as connected building level compliance, as well as the individual building level compliance, just not the portfolio wide.
So the next, I guess, two questions can be kind of combined here, and it's related to the last slide that was displayed. What will be the EUIT in 15 years? And when does the 15 years start? When the rules are set?
Yeah, we're going to go over timeline in a few slides here, but in short, the 15 years starts when the decarbonization plan is submitted. And the EU, we have not developed future EUITs for the 5-year cycles. We are gathering from this first cycle, we're going to be gathering EUI data from submittals, and that'll help us inform us to what future energy use intensity targets are for the future cycles. And we hope to kind of map out cycle by cycle energy use intensity targets at that point. So you should know after the first cycle what energy use intensity targets will be for the foreseeable future.
That's all we have in chat so far.
Okay, great, Donnie.
All right. Thanks, Luke. So over the next few slides, we're just going to look at who must comply with this legislation and who has opportunities to opt into the compliance through House Bill 1390. First, though, we just want to look at the definition of campus as it's used quite a bit in the legislation so that we can provide a little context. So House Bill 1390 defines campus as a collection of buildings served by a district heating, cooling, water reuse, or power system. Next slide, please. So House Bill 1390 identifies two types of district energy systems. The first of those is state campus district energy systems, which are required to comply with this legislation. State campus district energy systems are defined as a district energy system providing heating, cooling, or heating and cooling to a campus through distributed steam, hot water, or cool water to 5 or more buildings with 100,000 square feet of combined conditioned space, where the system and all connected buildings are owned by the state of Washington or by a public-private partnership, including one public buildings owner and one private entity. Next slide. So the legislation also identifies campus district energy systems. Owners of these systems are able to opt into the requirements of House Bill 1390, but are not required to pursue compliance through this alternative compliance path. Similar to state campus district systems, campus district energy systems are defined as a district energy system providing heating, cooling, or heating and cooling to a campus through distributed systems providing steam, hot water, or cool water to 3 or more buildings with more than 100,000 square feet of combined conditioned space. And all connected buildings are owned by either a single entity, a public-private partnership, in which a private entity owns the district system and one public entity owns the connected buildings, or 2 private entities in which one owns the district system and one owns the buildings connected to that system. Next slide. Those are big definitions. Just want to show a side-by-side comparison to kind of identify the differences between those two. Real quick, campus district energy system, optional compliance. They have the ability to opt in to the legislation and to pursue compliance through 1390. This is defined as 3 or more buildings with over 100,000 tied to the district energy system, owned by a single entity, public-private partnership, where the district system and public building, private owner of the district system and public building owners, or 2 private entities, one private owner of a district system and one private owner of buildings connected to that system, versus the state campus district energy system, which is mandatory for their compliance through 1390, which is defined as 5 or more buildings with over 100,000 square feet, both the district system and the buildings owned by the state of Washington, or a public-private partnership, including public building owners and one private entity owner owning the district system. I'll pause there before I hand it back to Luke, and we can see if there's any questions on the definitions.
I'm not seeing anything yet.
Okay.
So people still might be typing in right now, though.
All right.
Okay, moving on to the timeline. So we'll get a little more detailed here. Commerce is charged with developing these rules by June of this year. So like I said, we'll be spending the next few months developing these rules. Rules be adopted by June. At that point, the legislation requires that state-owned campuses start to develop their initial decarbonization plan. And at that point, any privately held campuses are allowed to start their, are required to start their compliance plans as well, if they elect to opt in. Again, it's optional for private campuses, a requirement of state-owned campuses. So startup plans in June of 2024, and they are due a year later in June of 2025. Plans will be reviewed, and that is when this 15-year plan starts. So again, it's 15 years, but based on the plans, you can request for more time if needed. So every 5 years thereafter, there will be a reporting process. So this will be progress reporting to Commerce, the details of which will be developed in the administrative rules workshops and process of the rule development that we're going through right now. But progress reporting will be done every 5 years based on the decarbonization plan submitted. And then within 15 years, or if approved, more than 15 years, compliance will be required. So that'll be part of mapped out in the plan. It may be that in some circumstances, the state campuses or private campuses decarb plans will allow for compliance reporting prior to that 15-year mark. But you are allowed that 15 years plus. Next slide. A little more detail about the timeline and put here in text for you. So campus buildings are clearly identified and inventoried in the Clean Buildings portal in accordance with the process or procedures defined by Commerce. So between 2024 and 2025, Commerce needs to have the all buildings associated and connected to a district energy system for state campuses or the opt-in private campuses documented within our data portal. Commerce is currently working towards developing the processes within our portal in order to do so, because again, we'll have tier 1 buildings, tier 2 buildings, and more than likely some buildings that are less than 20,000 square feet that are connected to the district heating system and thus must be included in the decarb plan. So we need those all buildings identified in the portal. So we'll give you 2024, June 24 to June 2025 to develop that in the portal. At the same time, the qualified person shall or persons shall begin the development of the decarb plan. By June of 2025, decarb plans are submitted to Commerce for review. And as it stands right now, the energy management plans and O&M program shall start to be implemented based on the schedule outlined, current schedule outlined in the Clean Building Performance Standard. So for buildings over 220,000 square feet, the plans need to be implemented a year prior to the original compliance date. So the original compliance rate, or the building level compliance date, I should say, for buildings over 220,000 square feet is July of 2026. So we would want to see by end of June of 2025 that those EMP and O&M programs are implemented for those buildings on the campus over 220,000 square feet. By 2027 for the buildings over 90,000 square feet, between 90 and 220, as well as tier 2 buildings. And then by 2028, they would be for the last cohort of buildings on the campus, including the buildings 50 to 90,000 square feet. And then all other buildings that are not tier 1 or tier 2 shall have the energy management plans and operations and maintenance programs implemented with them by as of now, by the full implementation of decarb plan. So here we're kind of dabbling a little bit in proposed rules. These EMP and O&M program implementation dates are not specifically called out in the standard, and we'll be discussing them in more, or in the legislation, I should say. We'll be discussing them more during the tier 2 or during the 1390 rulemaking here, subsequent workshops. So again, progress reporting is required on every 5-year cycle. And that 5-year cycle begins on June of 2025 when plans are submitted. And lastly, compliance reporting anytime around 2040 or whenever the decarb plan has that mapped out. All right, Annalyn, I think this is you.
Okay, do you want to pause for questions before I dive into this? You want to take a few questions?
Yeah, that
Yep.
sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, we did have another question come in. Do buildings on campus that aren't connected to district energy systems default to other CBPS compliance pathways?
Yeah, if they are covered tier 1 or tier 2 building, not connected to the campus district energy system, they would need to comply with tier 1 or tier 2 requirements based on the original rules. So the rules that are currently in effect for the Clean Building Performance Standard.
Right, that's the only other question we have. We have received a couple of comments in chat, and I just kind of want to remind folks that we also have a link to our public comment form, so you can submit those comments directly through here. We will be collecting the comments that are posted in chat as well, though.
Wonderful, thanks, James. Okay, so this is what Emily was referring to in the beginning, Commerce's request. So we do have a list of existing public energy district systems. However, we don't have all the details to it. So we kindly ask, we request all public buildings connected to a district energy system provide the list of buildings that's connected to it, the square footage for each building, the addresses, the property name, the parcel number, and if it's already assigned a Commerce building ID, that'll be helpful just so that we could set up the Clean Buildings portal to kind of support the compliance for this in the future. So we'll provide instructions in the future on how to get this to us. But for now, I just want to give you the heads up that we'll be collecting this. So if you could inventory your building and start collecting this information, that'd be great. And then this will apply for those public buildings connected to an energy district system that would choose to opt in. So submitting comments, we certainly value your input and your feedback, and we hope you can actively participate by submitting comments. There's different ways to submit comments. There's one using the comment form. Here's a screenshot of what it looks like. It's a pretty simple form. If your comments can't fit in the comment box, you can simply put it in a Word document or a PDF and upload it. You can submit comments by emailing the buildings@commerce.wa.gov. Please ensure that the subject line is House Bill 1390 comments. What we're going to do, if you email it, we'll just transcribe and put it into the comment form just so we can have it all in one place. And then during the public hearing, which we'll have after the rules, that's where you can provide verbal testimony. And as James said, if you put a comment in the chat box, we'll also put this in the comment form for you. So if you have any specific questions and would like an actual response, you can submit a customer support ticket, or you could email the buildings@commerce.wa.gov. Judy, if you could put, I don't know if you've done it, but can you put the comment form link again in the chat for those who might have missed it earlier? And then, yeah, I just want to mention the next workshop. They mention that we're going to have 2 workshops. However, if deemed necessary, we will add another one. But the next one will be February 8th. Judy, if you could put the registration link in the chat. It's 2 hours. We'll have a break in between, and we'll continue to, during that workshop, we'll have draft rules available for everyone to kind of review and then to comment on and provide input. And then we'll have our 3rd workshop in March 7. Again, another 2-hour workshop. These are subject to change. This all depends on kind of the engagement and how much work we have to do in drafting these rules. But you'll see the administrative requirements kind of towards the end, which is workshop 3. That's where we'll talk about penalties, and we'll talk about just the other requirements, such as the compliance forms, things like that then. And you can find the registration links also in our website, and you'll see that link in the chat as well. And then I want to take it back to additional questions that you might have entered while I was speaking for Luke or Donnie.
So we don't have anything yet, but like I said, people may be entering questions in now, so if we want to give them a few minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if anybody would prefer to unmute and ask questions, we're more than happy to field those since we have the time.
So we did have one question come in. So regarding progress reporting from June 2030 and each 5 years after, may that progress reporting look like additional energy reporting or status updates on decarbonization plan implementation?
Yeah, I imagine it will include progress reports on relative to the decarb plan. So if part of the decarb plan is also implementing upgrades to the system to handle the decarbonization, it may include the installation of energy efficiency measures at a building level in order to meet the requirements of the decarb plan. At minimum, it will require the documentation through forms A, B, and C of the standard. Form A is kind of a general compliance, a summary. Form B is the energy use intensity target that may or may not change as time goes on, as building use changes, building activity use changes. And then Form C is documentation and submittal of the energy use intensity through the Energy Star portfolio manager account for that campus. So in subsequent rulemaking workshops, we'll talk more about the administrative requirements and reporting requirements for the decarb plan.
We have someone, Jeffrey Glass, if you'd like to go on mute and ask your question.
Yeah, I think I'm off mute here, but yeah. So my question is really framed from in my own personal experience. This is pretty brand new. In fact, it's unfolding in terms of my awareness of what a decarbonization plan means. And I wonder if it certainly would help our organization if there were a couple of sample plans that Commerce were aware of that kind of met the expectations of this legislation that possibly could be shared with us. Maybe they'd be state plans or something. So we could understand what it means to commit to a decarbonization plan and what are the elements for our decision in the middle of the year as to whether or not to submit. It would be an opt-in private. So I just ask from the kind of the educational perspective, if that's a resource that was available, possibly some existing state plans or something.
Good question, Jeff. Yeah, I know that would be useful and relevant, especially for those private building owners who have the opportunity to opt in. There are several public and private projects in development currently. I know a couple of universities in the state, as well as some private projects in the Seattle area that have plans for decarbonization and even begun them. I will certainly, or our team will work together to kind of gather some of the publicly available information on these projects. And it's a great suggestion. We can email those out potentially on our listserv. So if folks are signed up on our website for our listserv, you already get a bulletin from Clean Buildings on occasion. We can potentially include that in the bulletin so everybody's informed.
Great, thank you.
So we do have quite a few questions in chat itself, so I'll just start with the first ones we've received. What do the next two workshops look like? Is it collaborative rulemaking? What are the expectations for participation? And who would you like to hear from?
Liz or Annalyn, do you feel compelled to take this? I'll start, and if anybody has anything to add. So the next workshop will be working on the specific rules and guardrails for these decarb plans. So we don't want to create such narrow rules that we're really funneling folks towards specific decarbonization plans. What the intent of the rules is to do is create guardrails so that we can identify considerations for allowances, such as backup systems. And again, so big part is identifying concerns and considerations from stakeholders. So this comment process can start now. When any of you folks can submit a comment, which could be a question or a concern. We take that information and it helps us prepare the proposed rules, which we will present at the next workshop. From that, we can have a discussion during that workshop. So it's going to be a 2-hour workshop. We can discuss the specific proposals. At that point, we will receive comments again from the next workshop. We will use that information to help massage the rules that were proposed. And in many cases, it will clearly address the questions and concerns identified through the comments or through the workshop itself. So the following workshop will be, is planned to be the administrative rules. So what are the documentation requirements, basically the reporting requirements for the decarb planning. And if we may find that we need a little more time to massage the rules, we would schedule another workshop to do so, or perhaps we move the administrative rules to a later workshop and use the scheduled workshop 3 as an opportunity to continue work on the proposed rules for the decarb plans.
All right, ready for the next question?
Sure.
And to add to that, you know, we are, this is the opportunity to get considerations, especially if you have a uniqueness to your, the scenario of your district energy system and your buildings. This would be the time to kind of give us that information, and hopefully we could take some consideration as we draft rules.
All right, next question. Are buildings less than 20,000 square foot connected to a district electric or steam system required to be included in EMP and O&M plans?
Yeah, so the legislation specifically states that the EMP and O&M program are required to be implemented on all buildings connected to the district's heating system. So yes, the buildings under 20,000 square feet would need to be included in that energy management plan, operations and maintenance program. So the legislation does also explicitly state that one EMP and O&M for the campus is allowed. You don't have to have one for each individual building. It can be a collection for all buildings.
Right, next question. It sounds like a shared electric supply single meter for a whole campus would not count as a district energy system. Please confirm.
Yeah, a shared electric supply, the intent is so like a master meter. It is not the intent of the legislation to consider those district systems. And again, the decarb plan is for decarbonization of the district heating system itself. So regardless of how it's defined as a district system, if there is no heating provided by that district system, then the actual decarb of the heating plant would not be needed. We'll have to look into the specific language in more depth to determine whether any of the other recommendations of the decarb plan would need to be implemented when a district system does not contain a district heating system. Good question.
All right, next question. Do you have a template for the pre-plan report that is due on June 2024?
Currently, the specific rules around the June 2024 date has not been determined. We'll determine any specific requirements for that June 2024 date through this rulemaking. It's likely that the June 2024 date, that's just when state building owners and opt-in owners need to start their decarb plan. At this point, we don't have any requirements for that date for reporting to Commerce.
All right, so going back to the timeline slide, are all state district energy system decarbonization plans going to be due in June 2025?
As this legislation is written, June 2025 is the due date for those decarbonization plans. Through rulemaking, I'm not too sure if we have the authority to extend that date and there are certain circumstances or not, but we can certainly discuss that during rulemaking.
Okay, next question. Why would a private organization want to opt into this type of compliance if they were previously not required to do so?
Well, there may be several reasons, but a couple I can think of is, there are other programs such as Seattle BEPS that are going to require decarbonization of buildings as well. So it may be advantageous since they're going to be required by the Seattle legislation. They might as well take advantage of the state's allowance for private building owners to opt in. That will allow them the ability to focus their funding, capital improvement funding, on decarbonization of that plant to reduce the carbon output of their campus. At the same time, reducing their energy use intensity for the campus in an effort to meet the targets required by the Clean Building Performance Standard. And this allowance gives them greater timeline for compliance. So as Clean Building Performance Standard is, the due dates for compliance are 2026 and 27 and 28, depending on the size of the building. If a building owner opts into the decarb rules, which we're developing now, they're given 15 plus years to meet the Clean Building Performance Standard. So it gives them a little bit of extended timeline as well.
So before we move on to the next question, oh, nope, looks like Judy, you've already answered that in chat. So anyway, on to the next question. To what degree is network geothermal emphasized as a way to share energy across the campus?
Well, there is nothing in the legislation that directly addresses any specific technologies. That may not happen in rules, but it may happen in guidance documents post rulemaking.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other additional questions in chat, so I'm not sure if anyone has anything else they want to add, or I think like Luke mentioned earlier, come off mute and ask your question directly. So here's a quick one. When will the video recording of this be available?
We will try to post it on our YouTube channel today or at the latest tomorrow morning, and I will email it to all of the registrants by this afternoon or tomorrow morning. But you won't see it posted on the website because that takes a little longer, because we have a webmaster for all of Commerce web pages. Okay, it looks like that's it for the questions. Perhaps we can wrap up a little early. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us. We thank you for your time and your attention. We hope you continue to participate in the rulemaking during our next workshop, February 8th from 10 to 12. We hope you register, and we'll see you then. Please provide comments through the comment form or the inbox, and have a great day.